I do want to move on to our keynote speakers this morning. Ms. Sally Swanson and Deniz Turin are both going to be joining us. I want to give a short bio, if you let me. So, Principal Sally Swanson, principal of, what's that?
You can introduce yourself. Does anyone want microphone? Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Good morning. Sorry, I missed the introduction section this morning. I'm the GIS director at Sally Swanson Architects, and I will be talking about how we incorporate the ADA compliance data into GIS after Sally's portion of the talk. Sorry.
Okay, well, what I really enjoy today is participation, is that everybody was participating. And I don't want you to freeze. I really want you to raise your hand and say, I don't understand this. This looks ridiculous. I really want you to participate. What I wanted to do today was talk about ADA transition plans and self-evaluation plans. Deniz will be talking about our GIS integration. We do an enormous amount of pro work. I also love wayfinding, and it's something I've been working a lot on. I have a book that I haven't finished yet, but it's wayfinding for all. It's for people with physical, cognitive, other countries, big, large, small. It really reaches out to everybody. You know, I'm a USA Paralympic reporter, and in Beijing, they brought everybody to Istanbul, and from Istanbul, you were brought into Beijing. This was the last Paralympic event. And I fell in love with the Istanbul airport. And this is what we have here. Everything was clear. Everything was obvious. And in wayfinding, if you make the decision, you need support. So I just wanted to say hurrah and introduce it as an introduction. And we'll be talking more about wayfinding. Let's see. What is ADA? I've got to share something with you. I don't know if anybody knows the late Ed Roberts. Amazing, amazing man. So I was a professor at Antioch College West, and I had a student that needed an advisor. And we went over to Berkeley, and in the wonderful Berkeley buildings, little houses, we met Ed Roberts. And as a child of 8, we suffered the fear of getting polio. And I know my girlfriend got it, and she told me about the pain and her arm shortened. So when I saw Ed in the iron lung, I went, whoa, I got really excited. But he was a leader. He was the one. I don't know if he got tied to buses, but he protested in San Francisco. He went to Washington, D.C. He was our really great leader, and he was my leader. He was my mentor. And at that time, we developed the ADA transition plan. You know, first you had the Civil Rights Act in 1964. That wasn't much of anything. Then you had the Section 504, the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. And I worked with that a lot, and that didn't do anything. That didn't have any kind of bite. But when we got the 1990 ADA Act, we were in business. You know, if somebody didn't make steps to clean up their environment and make it equitable, you were going to be sued. And a lot of times we come on the end of a lawsuit. But with ADA, what we're looking for is not revolution. We're just looking for program, services, activities, making them accessible. Bring your programs downstairs. Offer your services online. Make all your activities accessible. And with that success, I think it's been far more positive. I just want to tell you what a transition plan is all about. First, we'll survey the environment. We'll identify all the barriers. We'll prioritize the barriers, and this is the hardest. And what we say, anything that's a high hazard, any kind of hazard where you can bump your head, trip, as you were saying, walk down the street and flop maybe, that is your highest priority. And it's hard to prioritize barriers. It takes quite a bit of time. Then you plan for the mitigation effort. How are you going to do it? And it's so interesting because we did the county of Sacramento, and that took years. So I thought, oh, lots of money here. They're going to put a lot of money every year. Well, they didn't. So we kind of battled back and forth. You've got to set money aside to remove these barriers. Well, we'll do it in the next 15 years. I said, okay, more money, please. But that was the negotiation. We just finished the college of Solano College, and they decided when they did every area, they would remove all the barriers. What could I say? That was going to be another 10 years. Then we worked with UC Berkeley, doing the ADA transition plan. And what they said, we'll do paths of travel first because they're on a hillside. But you've got to get a commitment, and it's very, very difficult. You also have to get an official to administer the plan, and it keeps on changing, so you want to pin that down for sure. So what do we look at? First, we start on the outside. We look at the parking. Is the parking accessible? Then we look at the transit. How do you get there? We look at the drop-off and at the entrance. So that's our highest priority is first, how do you get to the facility? Then we looked at in the interiors, the program function, the support spaces, restrooms, drinking fountains, counters. Counters really drive me crazy. I remember when we did it, we actually, as an architect, we renovated it and made a lower counter, and all of a sudden there was a pot on the counter, and I said, wait a minute, can't do that, take that away. But it's although there's an education on how to make your interior accessible. And then there's a staff only with no public program. So these are the various areas we look at, and in great detail. Should I just hit it? Okay. This one? Oh, okay. So once again, all the information, and we have FileMaker, we've been working with Blue Dad now, is that we record all the barriers on the site. Then we do a digital survey. And I keep saying this is a real, alive process. I want somebody assigned to this that's going to toot your horn, show everybody what you did, show your success, but also as you remove barriers, let people know about it. And when yesterday was like, oh, the material was terrible, I got really upset. I thought, well, how come this data wasn't updated? Where did it fall apart? You want to reach out to your community. And now that we have Zoom, it's almost wonderful. For a while, we'd reach out to the community, nobody would show up. But with Zoom, we've been far more successful because individuals that use a space truly know what the problem is and how it should be corrected, and we follow their direction. Once again, we have a report on the findings. We submit it to the board or the council, whoever it is, and we want to get their acceptance. We want to say that they're going to endorse this plan. And that's usually the hardest part. That can take, as I was mentioning before, a whole year for the board. We've been doing this in Arbelinda, a city in California, and it's always, no, not ready. Oh, yes, we want this. I mean, Deniz has been through, change that word, move that over there. I said, let's go to your board and bring this to an end. And when you do, that's success. Just want to talk about wayfinding. What I find is the environment really, really talks to you. This is in San Francisco, the Harvey, the new pier, I guess the one area, I guess it's zone 1 that they've opened up. And you can see they've brought artwork. And it's really a pleasure. But you also register with artwork. Gee, I remember that in that Terminal 1. It wasn't in Terminal 2. And it's a joy to be there. And I love this restroom. I'm really crazy about signs for restrooms. I've collected them from around the country. Is you really get, this is the entrance. This is for women, not for men. And it speaks to everybody. Let's see if we can do this. This is the transit stop, San Francisco Muni. And I just think I worked on this, and I think this is so successful. First of all, it has heating. You know, in San Francisco, it can get pretty cold, similar to this weather right now. It has a safety system. It tells you when the Muni is going to arrive, so you've got your timing down. It has a safety system, which I think is very important. I keep talking about safety. And it's really pleasant to sit there for everybody. So it's a very, very successful station. It also has a map, and it'll show you where you're going. Now, I was over in Taiwan with TRB, and I just love the top sign. I can't get over it. It tells you so much so simply. And when I was in Beijing, boy, they let you know this is a space don't touch it. You know, they really enforced the seating, the green logo for a chair. I just thought that was wonderful as well. This is an area where I'm reaching out to you for help. And I think this conference has given me the most, is I know nothing about how to get around an environment successfully. You know, I've talked about your phone, telling you where to go. We know there are beacons for somebody who's blind, and we do have that in San Francisco. There are maps, but who wants to touch anything? I remember when I was in Rio, they had a beautiful map for the blind, and everybody said, I'm not going to touch that thing. That's not going to tell me how to get around the environment. So I'm reaching out to you to tell me how best, where should we go? Because eventually everything will be on our iPhone. What other ways are there getting around an environment that we need to know? And maybe we'll document it, and that maybe we can walk away with that, knowing what are the tools that are available right now. I want to know about it. Of course, you touch something, you know where you're going. There's so much information to easily share, but as we discussed yesterday, it's really not all that available. Just want to share some other wayfinding. The one in the middle, this was, I guess I can't blow it up, but I just thought that was hysterical. You want to get a taxi, you want to get a ride, and it was so clear. I'm afraid to say in your airport, ooh, getting a taxi is murder. So clear signage is wonderful. Now that's in Istanbul, but there were so many things telling you you were going to hit an elevator. You can't bring your truck along with it. It has to be simple. And there were so many warnings done so successfully to make it real. And of course, just a real simple sign can go a far way. And I'm very interested in signage and texture on the floor and making it verbal and visual. And it's needed, truly. Let's see. Let's talk about does everybody know what a self-evaluation plan is? Have you worked on it at all? No? Well, these are the policies of an entity, their programs, services, and activities, as well as their grievance. And this is really a very strong document. And when we go into cities or counties or correctional facilities, we say, what are your policies? What are your guidelines? And there's usually enormous resistance. We don't have any policies. And I remember I talked to one police station, I won't mention the city, he was saying, we've got our policies already. We don't need your policies. And you kind of get that feeling. They've got the policies, but you don't. But they really don't. And what we've done before, we've just brought a whole group together similar to this, and we've asked them questions and made them answer. And with this, let's see, does it come up? These are the things they need to deal with. Communication now is huge. We're working on the Sacramento airport, and that's one of their biggest things. And how do we communicate? What are the best ways to communicate? And I have to say, this lovely lady mentioned overload. You know, it's just kind of overload and overload. And it was interesting in Beijing, I just want to share this with you, is everything was on an app. Nothing was verbal. And of course, I needed a lot of help to get around. To get a taxi was on an app. To get on a train was on an app. To get on a site was on an app. You couldn't move without that app. And everything was very regulated. It moved right just on time. And one fellow said to me, you're on the wrong timeline. You're on this time versus that time. Oh, I'm really sorry. But they had everything timed very, very accurately. So it was extremely efficient. Communication, I think, talks to you. How are we going to talk? What kind of captioning? What kind of apps? This is something new. This is something we're all working on. We want to have an ADA coordinator. And I find ADA coordinators kind of come and go. We'll always ask, do you have an ADA coordinator? Well, maybe next year. We've asked for that to say the grievance procedures. What are your grievances? What are your evacuation? What are your reasonable accommodation? We now make it very easy. We have something we hand out and they just dot yes or no. And we've come to work with some people, well actually some counties right now, where okay, forget it, we'll just print it because they don't want to participate. But I think it's a very important document. And with that, we like to talk about the public right-of-way. You know, we deal with sidewalks, pet signals, stations where you sit down and wait for transportation. And I've always insisted we have some kind of an emergency system. We've got curb cuts, signage, and Deniz is going to take that away.
All right. So I'm going to try to talk about how we incorporate all the survey data into our database and JS systems. And once our surveyors are out on the field, they go to each pro element, including curb ramps, sidewalks, pedestrian signals, and bus stops, and they literally measure each component making up the curb ramps or the push buttons. They are using a tape meter to measure the height of where the push button is supposed to be according to the federal and state guidelines. And they enter those measurements, their observations, into our database with a picture. And this is a sample from a curb ramp database. As you can see, all the measurements for this particular curb ramp is in the system with the pictures, orientation, cross streets. And once we look at this layout, we can easily define, we can easily see what kind of a ramp type we have and what are the specifications for this particular ramp type. And the measurements which are marked in red are the deviations from the federal or state guidelines. So it is very easy for us to highlight what the severities are for this particular barrier. And once we enter this data into this database, we print all this information in an easy-to-follow-along formatted PDF report. And we highlight the most severe issue with that particular barrier in the as-is part in the red print. And then we propose a solution to remove that particular problem. And we attach a conceptual cost, call it as a unit cost. I say conceptual because with the current inflation and everything, this is not going to be the real life cost for sure. But this is going to be giving an idea to the city planners or county planners to how much, like the highest amount that it might take to rehabilitate this particular barrier. And on the right-hand side, we have all the measurements that are taken, clearly listed for the city or county planners to see and decide on where to start from. And this is for curb ramps, pedestrian signals, and bus stops. I have just this one sample from a curb ramp report. But for sidewalk data, we use a walking gadget that's called a profiler. It's attached to a computer, and it's simply pushed like a stroller on the sidewalk, and then it instantly starts recording every feature, every attribute of a sidewalk, such as a cross slope, a running slope, vertical changes, and it records the route. It's pushed over the sidewalk. For the obstructions, such as a tree blocking the sidewalk width or a bush protruding, over a height width, it needs to be entered manually by the surveyors. But every other attribute is like instantly recorded on this computer, which is really cool because it can be translated into JS very easily and seamlessly. And when we map the raw sidewalk data on JS, we can easily track the route that the surveyor moved along, and then we can pinpoint every hazardous obstacle or the cross slope issue or the run slope issue on that particular sidewalk. And then after we have all the data from the field, we kind of rank the data, and we use some criteria for our ranking system. And here I list some of the important places we look around. For example, the idea here is to define each barrier's foot traffic, like how likely a simple curb ramp will get foot traffic, depending on their proximity to schools, parks, hospitals, any like city hall, a shopping mall, or a major road. And we also take into consideration the census data for population density and senior population density, and we start ranking each pro element based on this criteria. Oh, sorry, I went back. All right. There is, this diagram is summing up it in a, I think in a more clear way. So the activity score is the proximity of each barrier to those locations I just mentioned and their frequency of uses and the population density that uses that barrier. And the severity score is the deviations that are coming from the federal and state guidelines, all those observations and measurements that the surveyors put into the system. And together, when we sum them up, we create this scoring system, which we call the priority score. And in the end, our final product is this JS map that shows our priorities on a general view for those city and county planners or decision makers to look at this map and try to come up with a plan to start remediating the highest priority from the lowest, so they can easily, this map is just an example showing the curb ramps and sidewalks only, but it is very easy to figure out where the highest priority lies within the city or the county that needs immediate attention, sort of, depending on those criteria I just explained. So, thank you. I tried to keep this simple because I wasn't sure how technical I should be. So if there are any questions, I can go more into detail.
Let's stay together.
Yeah, okay.
How do you measure the use of a sidewalk? I mean, I saw a lot of ways to estimate it, but are there tools to actually measure that?
Very interesting, because primarily we measure where it's going. Like if it's going to a public facility, it gets a high ranking. You know, where the greatest population density is within a city or a county. That is usually our greatest usage. I mean, that's how we've been doing it. I think schools are important, and of course transit is very important. But since the public government is paying for this, well, we do work with transportation departments as well, is that the public facilities are thought to be the highest use. So we look at the routes going to that, from transit, from buses, from car parks, from all those various areas. I think what's really important is, there's only X amount of money. Everybody's crying out, well, we just really don't have any money. We get that all the time. So we try to get the priorities, which is very, very hard to do, and which seems to be the most important part of our process. What should we do first, Sally? Where do you want us to spend the money, Sally? How should we spend the money, Sally? That seems to come at the end. And the way we've been doing it is we want to make your facilities accessible. We want to make your programs accessible. We want to make your transit accessible. Transit's a very big item. We did a transit plan for King County, which was a whole lot of fun, because we showed how to make a transit stops, each stop accessible on the route throughout the county. But it's usually the ones that are coming up with the funds and the usage that have the highest priority.
Don't you measure transit on roads by just putting a sensor across the road and counting how many cars pass it?
Well, we did a lot of work with Caltrans, and that was very interesting, because a lot of our work, and they did that's how they prioritized that format, but a lot of our work was training their staff, and they asked for training. They said, you can do whatever. Actually, they were being sued, so they were really alive and right there. But they said, training, we want to be trained. And that was the most successful part. We trained everybody that worked for Caltrans. We had a training session. So they did prioritize by the usage, how many cars were going over the public highway, but they also wanted to deal with maintenance. Maintenance is such a high issue. And I think that was mentioned yesterday, that was so successful, is when I go into cities, I said, let's do maintenance training, counties maintenance training, Caltrans maintenance training, because they can do so much to make that environment safe. As you said, when they're renovating something, they've got to make a safe passage by law. And how are they going to do it? So that seems to be pretty critical. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
So I have about 4 things.
Okay.
You're living in my world. The first question is, would you share your prioritization equations? Because I would love to see your priority. You know, that you don't have to. You can talk about it today, but I would love to see the details of that, because we'd like to code that kind of thing into Open Sidewalks as a tool that people could use if you're willing to share it.
Oh,
So
sure.
that,
You know how it started? It was very interesting. We were serving all the department employment, EDD, you know, their EDD offices. And they were saying, we need better criteria, Sally. They were saying, you're not giving us the right criteria. And they came up with this, this activity score.
Excuse me. Can you step in front of the microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can we just go back? Let's see.
Go back to
This, no. This was very interesting. We were working with EDD, the Employment Development Agency. We surveyed all their departments and all their various places throughout the state. And then they said, you know, I don't like your credibility, frequent use, location, population. That's not going to do it for us. We need, and this took a lot of work together, that we need the severity. That's the highest priority. You know, what is a hazard? What's a deviation? What is, I guess it's hazard, deviation, severity. And they wanted that as part of the evaluation. Because in the end, this is the most important document. They only have a bit of money to be, I'm surprised how little money they have. But you want to make it hit right. You want to make it work right. And so this really indicates what areas need to be addressed first. What's your immediate danger? Where will you be sued? I was working for the city of Emeryville. I don't know if you know that wonderful place, but they were sued because they're curb cuts, because they had cuts on the sidewalk. People tripped, and it was a hazard. And they wanted to know, where should we hit the sidewalk first? And through this methodology, it was very clear. And I'm here to share, and I certainly want you to use anything that's worthwhile.
So we, Mark, would love to have your math, so we see if we can actually absorb it and use it. But second thing I did is just kind of a point, and it comes to a comment that Thomas made earlier about his crosswalk. There aren't people crossing here. So one, as somebody who counts stuff that moves for a living, it's really hard and very expensive to actually count how many things are moving out there in the pedestrian realm. We do a very poor job of it unless you have the money to put up hardware to actually count it, and there becomes expensive to count very many places geographically. So we would love to know where people are. The downside of where people are actually moving is if you've made it hostile for them to wander around, nobody is there. The criteria that you're using is they ought to be showing up at these locations, which you've done a great job of listing where they should be going. And they will appear there if you make it easy for them to walk there. But prior to that, you aren't. So there's an interesting conundrum between where they ought to be walking and where they actually are walking. There's kind of a chicken and egg situation associated with that. And then the last, and you don't know where they're walking because we haven't counted it because we don't have the money to count it, but we can estimate where they ought to be counting by using the kinds of criteria you have. So that's an interesting flip about whether we're prioritizing where they are or prioritizing where they ought to be.
And I'd like to share that with you in more detail.
Yeah.
This is just a broad brush.
Yeah.
This is pretty broad brush, but I'd like to go how we developed the criteria.
Well, I love your criteria. I think that, and again, and that's why I'd love to see your analytical implementation of that. The last thing, because this morning we all started on equity, and there's a real interesting thing that's been pushed at me recently, and again, I get it, and I don't know how to deal with it, and that is when we prioritize the spaces where lots of people are moving, where the hazards are highest relative to lots of people, which from a government agency perspective, that's exactly where we want to prioritize. But we are doing in major metropolitan areas, those are the old towns. That's where the poor used to live, in downtown, because the white flight, we pushed the money into the suburbs, and suddenly downtown became cool again. The mixed-use walkable neighborhoods in Seattle around our train stations are gentrifying, and we're pushing the poor to Kent. And the Kent Hill is not walkable. You can't get to places. And those areas prioritize really badly because they are spread out, because they're not mixed use, because they aren't. And therefore, from an equity perspective, when we look at the prioritization of where the most people are, that's the highest value land values. And so some of our prioritization from a governmental most bang for the buck, fewest people falling down, are actually negatively affecting the equity perspective of where people might actually need this from an equity perspective. And that's actually why I asked Carol the question of how do we figure out where people are that we really need to serve, because we miss that in the census data.
Well, that's why community participation is critical. That's why it's part of ADA. And we tell the various entities we work with, you're going to have some community participation. I mean, you're going to have to participate. It was very interesting. I was working in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I had a fellow that participated all the time. I said, get rid of him. But I thought he was incredibly valuable. So participation has many modes, but you have to participate. By law, you have to participate. It's not something maybe if, okay.
We thank everybody in the room who's participating. Thank you.
I love this. This is beautiful to see. I love the cart, the stroller technology. And I'm just curious. I mean, of course, this seems like something that needs to be happening everywhere and not reactively to lawsuits or whatever. And I'm just curious, like, where you see opportunities so that this whole process becomes more scalable and sort of crowdsourceable, or people can kind of like DIY these kinds of processes without needing to have somebody who can write a book about it, or needs to have the special cart or whatever.
Well, that's a wonderful question. I mean, that's where we're all going. I think that's why I really enjoy being here. It's been very valuable for me to see so much energy in so many different directions. And I think you just have to speak up and do it. You have to ask for it to be accessible.
But you're writing a book on this, right? I mean, is that one of the goals of your book?
I'm pretty passionate about wayfinding. I'll be honest with you, I was in Japan, and A, they told you where to go to get the train. B, they told you when the train's going to show up. And I remember a girl, when we were dealing with Bart, she said, I can get a drink. I don't want to be down there for 45 minutes. Tell me when the train's going to show up. Then they tell you they have a color band. So they say everything in green is going to this location. Everything in red is going to this location. So they accurately told you where to go. Then you get there and they tell you, well, your train's coming in 10 minutes. Then you get on the train. Transfers all over are going to take this amount of time, and they talk to you. So I just got real excited about that. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if it's a good way to say it or not, but I've done a lot of work for Russia. I wrote their Paralympic bid, and gave many conferences, and I talked a lot. At one time, this was something that was really desirable, and they did do Sochi. I mean, Sochi was, I don't know if you know about Sochi, that was an Olympic, Paralympic site. It was amazing. And I was thinking, well, I can't write, I was a reporter, so I can't write anything about it. Everything we document is done until I fell down and tripped. And I said, oh, I forgot about wayfinding. So wayfinding has kind of been a passion, because when I went to Moscow, I'm just jumping around, but I thought, well, I've just got to check out this transit system. Of course, the language, you can barely make it out. It's totally different hieroglyphic. And I got on the train and I went down. It was extremely low, and I became terrified. I said, everything looks the same, and I went immediately back up. So that's when I thought, I've just got to talk about how to go safe, how to be directed so you feel confident. How, if you go to another country, you feel good about using transit. And it's yet to happen. We're just about completed.
Hey, could you go back to the slide where you showed the GIS data integration?
Sure.
The overlay. Yeah, oh yeah, this one, cool. Yeah, very cool system and very nice visualization. Trying to understand this visualization here. Do you mind sharing what the different color representing here?
Different colors?
Yeah.
So there's no legend, you're right to ask that. But probably the red is showing the cross slope issues, and the yellow is showing the vertical changes. And there might be another color or like a point showing the obstructions where there is like a light pole in the middle of a sidewalk, and then you will just see that on the route. And the ones that I mentioned here, like the cross slope, round slope, vertical changes, they are instantly recorded as you push the profiler, and then when we put it on GIS, we can easily see the cross slope issues, but those are just the parts that are deviated from the federal state guidelines for those cross slope. It shouldn't be that, inclined, but it is a little more inclined than it's supposed to be. So those are those colors for them.
Okay, if
The final map's real interesting.
Yeah, final map shows the priority score. And coming back to Mark's question, I want to add something. I understand the concern about the activity score, but it is not only based on activity, it's also based on severity. So I imagine for the old town, since it is an old town, the curb ramps should be out of compliance more than the newer locations around the shopping mall. So they will also weigh into the severity score, maybe even more than the activity score, and in the end, the priority might be almost balancing each other. But it will depend on of course, the city, I don't know. But there is also some kind of equality, I guess.
That's why I see your equation, because I think you have some brilliant plot in that equation, but I just want to see how it works.
Yeah, I would like to discuss that with you as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
You also have a follow-up question. So when you use your stroller system, do you always stay on the sidewalks? Is that?
Yes.
Okay,
There's
like,
another system for curb cuts. Are
Sure.
we making that automatic? Do we just say for the
I
profile?
couldn't hear the question. What was it?
Oh.
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
yeah, so when you push it around, do you always try to stay on the sidewalk?
Yeah, that's just for sidewalk.
Okay.
That profiler is only for the sidewalk. For the curb ramps and bus stops or the pedestrian signals, there is just simple measurement, like the tape measures.
Okay, I'm interested in seeing like how are you measuring some of the disconnection in the sidewalk? Like for example, there's a driveway between two sidewalks, or just two sidewalks are disconnected for any reasons. Is there any way that you're accounting for that?
So driveways are, I believe, they
hardly.
belong to the homeowners. Driveways belong to the homeowners, I believe. So that's why when we encounter a driveway, we just have to note it down. There's a driveway, so we skip it.
Also, that's a manual process.
Well,
I think
that's
that's
actually a
okay.
very big issue.
All right.
That is a very, very big issue. Home sidewalks. That is just a big issue. There's a lot of fighting about it. Some cities say they've got to make it accessible. Other cities say, forget it. The other thing we're noticing that's become a big issue is sidewalks that end. I think that we talked about that yesterday. Did we not? That some have sidewalks, some don't have sidewalks, none of them connect. And does it need a curb cut when it ends? And we're actually fighting this. We're really doing a lot of research as how do we resolve that? In other words, the city will have some sidewalks, then you won't have any. And we discussed that yesterday. Well, should there be a curb cut? You'll fall right off the sidewalk. Same thing is about your own property. Some cities say we're going to charge you. You're going to be sued if you don't fix your sidewalk. So it's totally variable. But it's something we're working on in more depth to resolve.
So are you like trying, starting from based on the data maintained by the government, and then try to do some additional assessment on the the slope and condition of the sidewalk? Is that how this is happening?
What I didn't understand, could you do?
Yeah. So when you start, did you start from like you already know where are all the sidewalks, and you're trying to do some additional assessment, or are you trying to find out where are all the sidewalks? Which is the case here?
We usually try to go over all the sidewalks, which takes a long time, as you can imagine. And there's also the issue with the no sidewalks, because we have to also map the no sidewalks for each city. But to your question, yeah, we have to go over wherever there's a sidewalk, even there, because they don't know if there's an issue or not. That's why we have to use the profiler on that sidewalk.
And then you're you have to manually mark down where are the no sidewalks?
Yes.
Okay.
It will depend on the surveyor. Whenever they encounter a no sidewalk area, they will just note it down, and then I will create the layer on GIS with no sidewalk.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to mention about the profiler. SSI developed it, and he developed it actually for airplanes. Then I didn't realize that airplanes have to be on an extremely flat surface when they arrive. And I guess he goes around the world surveying flat surfaces for airplanes. And we met at a conference, TRB, Transportation Research Board, and he said he wanted to get into access. So we worked together on developing the profiler. And turned it into looking at sidewalks versus planes landing. And the funniest thing, he said, anything with atomic material, it must be flat. And I said, oh, I really never knew that. So that was an insight that Deniz shared with me. But it was with him that we developed this tool, Deniz Scott and SSI. Thank you. I appreciate your work. Well,
I appreciate the presentation. And I think from what I'm seeing, I'm curious to see maybe where pedestrians are successfully walking on like the freeway shoulder. Your example from international airports reminded me of in Vienna, when I stayed there for a while, getting to IKEA from the city center. It took a train and a bus. And I feel like the bus's purpose was to get the pedestrians to the flat part of their like highway equivalent, or like whatever it was. I don't think, yeah. Anyway, and it felt pretty safe because there was just enough clearance in the shoulder, and it wasn't too much of a walk. And then it was just like big signs with a huge arrow that said IKEA, this way. So yeah, this data, I think, like the transition between the modes of transportation, I think that would be really great to see as well in the future.
I agree. That would definitely be a goal that we'd be working on. Well, thank you very much.
One more question.
Oh, one more question.
I'm curious about you all giving these data to municipalities or counties or whatever, and then what they do with it. My work, I've heard a lot from various jurisdictions that, they might have data like these. They might have data on where all the curb ramps are or where all the barriers are, but there's a lot of internal resistance to releasing those data to anyone for fear of getting sued. And I'm just curious about your experience with that.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying, is the hardest part is to get their commitment. But we can't finish the plan until we get their commitment. And it's got to be the prioritization, and it's got to be the money. They've got to commit in their general fund money, everything. Colleges, cities, counties, corrections. We're doing the correction facilities now for Hawaii. Oh my. They've got to commit some money to do a correct transition plan, or they will be sued, and we've been on the other end of it as well. That's the beauty of ADA. They go in with one city, boy, they went in and let them have it. So they've got to commit to money and what they're going to do. And policing them, well, the federal government is always there. I'll be honest with you, that happened in Hawaii, is that the federal government came in to make the correctional facilities more accessible. And it's happened for several other facilities I've worked on. So they've got to commit to money. And we've done the prioritization, as you see, in quite a bit of detail. And they've got to say, I'm going to do this. And the surprise was, which I thought had a lot of money, you'd think the county of Sacramento, they're rolling in the bucks, that they would have gone farther. But we couldn't push them any farther. They took $300,000 every year they were going to spend. And that was their commitment. And it took a year, a lot of talking, a lot of prodding to get them committing. But that's why I love ADA. I mean, they're all afraid. I like that. Then you get some action.
Can I add?
Sure.
So I think my understanding is that's the whole purpose of having a transition plan. Once they have the transition plan, they are protecting themselves from getting sued, because once somebody says my curb ramp is out of compliance, they need to publish this on their website, and they can say that we have the transition plan and we are working on it. But you don't know when they will fix it, but they have the transition plan and they are protecting themselves from getting sued in this way. And they need to publish this, actually.
Sorry, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So you're saying, like, if the transition plan is in place, there's, I guess, protection in releasing the data because or publicly releasing the data?
Yeah,
because
yes. So what I'm saying is, once they have the transition plan, they are safe to release the data. They won't give you the raw data probably, but they have to put the PDF, the report, into their system website. And if somebody says, I want my curb ramp to be fixed, and they will show it's in the transition plan, and we are working on it. So that will be that they have a schedule to fix it in near future, hopefully, or like in 10 years.
Got it. Thank you.
But you're right. This is interesting, because this is a safety feature, and that's why people, I think, are doing it. Is that they have their plan. They say we're planning it. It's going to happen. We haven't forgotten about you. But then again, there goes the public. You just got to put the pressure on. You can't stop participating.
I think that was a great ending note. You cannot stop participating.